It is 10:45. 5live, Claire McDonald with you this morning on 5live Daily. Now, this is a jaw-dropping story, and I'm delighted to say the woman at the centre of it is sitting opposite me in the studio. She says her life was ruined after contracting Lyme disease, and she's calling for healthcare workers to recognise the disease. She's Tracy Clarkson. She endured long spells in hospital, months off work. She lost her active lifestyle after being bitten. This is all it was. She was bitten whilst walking in Cumbria. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming in. We're also joined by Stella Hughshires from the charity Lyme Disease Action, and who waited 3 years before she could be diagnosed with Lyme disease as well. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tracy, let's start at the beginning. You were out having a walk, weren't you?
I was walking in Arnside, which is in Cumbria. I was 9 months pregnant with my son, and just thought that a walk might help me to bring things on. Because I was so heavily pregnant, I hadn't realised that I'd actually been bitten on my leg. Couldn't see my leg, so it'd actually been in me for about 3 weeks before we actually noticed it.
And this is the actual tick?
This was the actual tick.
In your leg?
Was still buried in my leg. And it has a telltale sign. It's called a bullseye rash. And I had a very obvious bullseye rash around the tick. I went to the Royal Lancaster Infirmary to have the tick removed. And they decided to not give me antibiotic treatment, which wasn't something that they did 10 years ago. And the fact that I was pregnant, they decided that it wasn't the right thing to do. And basically from then on in, I became more and more ill with various things.
Yes. So, I mean, this went on for years, didn't it?
It did.
I mean, and it was truly horrific. You succumbed to meningitis. Just talk us through some of the what we know now as Lyme disease, but some of the other attendant illnesses you got as a result of that.
Yeah, it started really quite soon after being bitten. I started with like quite vague symptoms, just a lot of tiredness. I started to get horrendous premenstrual symptoms, which I'd never experienced before. And then in 2005, I got meningitis and spent 3 weeks in hospital. It was put down to viral meningitis. And it continued in 2006. Again, I was getting tonsillitis every single month. I ended up having to have a tonsillectomy. Couldn't recover from it. They wondered if I had MRSA or something, because it wouldn't heal. From then on, I got just lots and lots of things. I'd started a master's degree, and people were saying, "Oh, you're getting stressed, you're getting tired." But I'd had a very fit, active outdoor lifestyle, and I knew that it wasn't that. That did pick up a little bit until 2008, when after swimming Windermere, I did the Great North Swim, things started to get really bad again. My mouth blistered. I got really severe pins and needles in my legs. At one point, my legs completely collapsed from underneath me. I was taken to the Royal Lancaster Infirmary, who then took me to the Royal Preston Hospital, to the neurological ward. Where I was looked at by various consultants who said there was nothing wrong with me. And all they could say, they did an MRI scan, looked at the MRI scan, and all they could say with any certainty was that it wasn't MS, but they wouldn't at any point acknowledge that it could possibly be Lyme disease, which we asked them on many occasions. They said it was a very silly notion. Lyme disease wasn't in this country, and they were quite certain that it wasn't.
And just to clarify, it's actually Lyme disease is a bacterial infection spread to humans by infected ticks. And these can be found in woodland areas. They feed on the blood of mammals, including humans. So essentially a bacterial infection brought to you by the tick. Now, before all of this, your mother, who's a nurse.
She is.
She looked at this and thought, what did she think? Tell us what she thought way back when it actually happened.
Yeah, well, she was actually working at the University of Cumbria as an occupational health after working on A&E for many years, and had seen a couple of cases of it. When a student came in who was in a wheelchair and had been diagnosed with Lyme disease, my mum realised that all the symptoms were so similar to mine that it was likely that that's what I had. She decided at that point, after being told by the NHS, I think I had 10 consultants at this point, that it was the only way forward would be to pay privately. And we went to the Nuffield Hospital to see Dr. Damon, who's a consultant rheumatologist, and who was the only kind of Lyme able doctor in the country at that time. Pretty quickly, he diagnosed Lyme disease at this point. So we're now in 2009. I was bitten in 2004. He diagnosed Lyme disease through my symptoms, but then sent off some blood tests, called ELISA blood tests, to America. 2 weeks later, the results came back unequivocally positive, both the IgG and the IgM.
And for how many years had you been saying it could be this?
At this point, it was 5 years. So anyone who would listen to me, any GP, any consultant, I had a urologist, a neurologist, gynecologist, endocrinologist, everything. We had asked everybody what are the chances I was bitten by a tick. All the symptoms suggest Lyme disease. Can it not be? Are you sure it's not Lyme disease? For 5 years, and they all said no. It was our silly notion. It was more likely that I had mental health problems and I was a hysterical woman.
And all the time, I'm delighted to say your young son, Georgie, has come in with you this morning. Morning, Georgie. All the time, you were caring for a young child. It sounds like you're very active. You're out there. Just tell us how difficult that was to be told. And as you just said, you've got mental health problems. There's nothing actually physically wrong with you.
It was horrendous. George is the youngest of my 3 children, so I was actually bringing up 3 children alone at that point. I'd had to end the master's degree that I was doing due to all the illnesses that I had. So it really did put my life on hold to a great degree. I was training for triathlons. I was an open water swimmer, very, very active. And I was reduced to basically being bedridden, not being able to walk, being in a wheelchair. I couldn't use my bladder, my bowel, everything that you could possibly think of at some point has gone wrong with me. So it was incredibly difficult. However, I wasn't prepared to be beaten. So there was some kind of fight in me, I suppose, which allowed me to continue to try and get the correct treatment and testing for Lyme disease sufferers.
Well, thank goodness, because that fight has got you here today. Let's talk to Stella Hughes-Shires from the charity Lyme Disease Action. Stella, is that a familiar sounding story? Rather depressingly, I suppose it is.
Yes, not jaw-dropping to us. We have heard things like that before, but Tracy has had an awful time. Can I just make one comment about your introduction, where you said Lyme disease is carried by infected mammals, and these occur in woodland. It is not just woodland. The principal reservoir of the Lyme disease bacteria is mice. Wherever you have mice, you will probably have Lyme disease. So it's not just woodland, it's not just the countryside, it occurs in towns and town parks and town gardens as well.
And how can you contract it from mice then?
Oh, the tick feeds on the mouse and then drops off to the ground, goes through a life change and turns into a slightly bigger tick, and then attaches to a human and passes on the bacteria that it acquired from the mouse.
And do you have any figures on? I mean, yes, it's impossible to say, isn't it? If there's misdiagnosis going on left, right, and centre because of lack of awareness, is it difficult to get the figures of how many people contract this every year?
Yes, the only figures that are counted are those with positive blood tests. So we know that very definitely about 1,000 people every year catch Lyme disease. But a lot of people are diagnosed when they have the rash. That is much better awareness of the rash now, mainly among patients, not so much amongst doctors, but patients will say, look, I've got this rash. And that's probably another few thousand. And then, as you say, there are all those who are not diagnosed because they never saw a tick, they never saw a rash. I mean, would you see anything? If it was behind your knee, a tiny little tick the size of a poppy seed, and then a rash that develops after you've picked the tick off, not knowing what it was, you probably never see the rash, so you wouldn't associate an illness that comes up 2 or 3 weeks later with a tick bite.
And what is your personal experience of all of this?
My personal experience is nothing like as dramatic as Tracy's. But I had tick bites. I have about between 1 and 10 tick bites a year. But this one gave me a classic rash that just grew bigger. GP at that time didn't recognize it. I didn't know anything about Lyme disease. And I just started getting more and more symptoms and eventually had a blood test 3 years later, which gave me a positive test result and some treatment.
I mean, that's such a long time, though, isn't it? What were your symptoms in those 3 years?
A vast range of symptoms. Headaches, some loss of hearing, difficulties with my sight, pain, joint pain, loss of weight, all sorts of things. I mean, Tracy will recognise all these.
She's nodding
and
away.
Lots of people listening will think, oh, yes, I've had that, but I've had other things as well. It varies from person to person. It can be extremely debilitating, or it can be actually not too bad, and symptoms can come and go, and every time you think about going to a doctor, that symptom disappears and something else crops up. So
what is the answer? We heard in Tracy's case it was a blood test that gave the definitive diagnosis. What is the answer in your opinion?
The biggest answer is better awareness, both amongst the public to look for ticks and take them off properly, and also amongst doctors. We've collaborated with the Royal College of General Practitioners in the middle of last year to produce an e-learning module for GPs, and several hundred of them have already looked at this module and have taken the course, and that will help raise awareness. Wherever a doctor thinks Lyme disease doesn't occur in this country, or, as we were actually told yesterday by someone, doesn't occur in South London, then they won't consider Lyme disease. So they need to be aware that it occurs everywhere, and they need to have some awareness of the symptoms. And then there's a chance that it might get diagnosed. The tests aren't perfect. They depend on an antibody response developing in the patient. And it doesn't develop for several weeks. So early on, the test is very likely to be negative, and early treatment is important. Later on, the antibodies may not develop because perhaps the patient was misdiagnosed and was given a course of short, early antibiotics, and that stopped a positive test developing. In our experience, that's one of the main reasons for negative blood tests. But doctors tend to be very rigid. If you've got a negative blood test, you can't have Lyme disease. And that is just not so.
So they need to come back, and they need to be educated into how all the variants surrounding this, because it sounds like there are many. Tracy, I guess you would support everything said there by Stella.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real unreliability of UK testing compared to other countries in the UK, and the UK seem to say that all the other countries in the world are wrong and the UK's testing is right. And also that combined with not recognising that the same people will test positive because they haven't made the antibodies is absolutely true. And sometimes the people that are not showing the antibodies in the blood test are actually the people that are very ill, and the Lyme bacteria is hidden within the bodies, which the Lyme disease is a great imitator and can hide. And
so, to be fair to the medical profession, it's a very tricky one to diagnose.
It's a very tricky one, yeah. But again, if the testing's not positive, isn't reliable enough and isn't sophisticated enough, then they're never going to be able to find it. So it's unfair to really say that if they can't find it, they're not getting the positive test, then to say you haven't got it, it's not fair.
Tracy, well, thank you so much for coming in. Georgie,
Thank you.
How is it having your mum back fit and well again?
Good.
Did you have a good Christmas?
Yeah.
Was Santa good to you?
Yeah.
What did you get?
An Xbox One.
Oh, what? Santa was incredibly good to you. Thank you so much. Great to see you looking so
Thank
fit
you.
and well. That was Tracy Clarkson. She had a horrific time with Lyme disease before she had a diagnosis of what was wrong. We also heard there from Stella Hughes Shires from the charity Lyme Disease Action.